So I'm delighted to introduce our first panel of the day. I'll invite each speaker to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion around what we're seeing across different sectors as far as violence and aggression in the workplace. Jack, can I start with you?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jacqueline Starr, I go by Jack. I'm the Chief Executive of the Rail Delivery Group. So we're an organisation that provides critical systems and services to all of the train operators across the UK. And we also run a number of programmes and projects, so we coordinate a lot of effort for various areas to include violence against women and girls.
Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Mercedes Esperett. I'm the Violence and Aggression Reduction Lead at Guys and Central Hospital, covering the acute and general medicine services, looking at strategic policy, staff wellbeing services, supporting staff post-incident, and looking at the wider ways we can prevent violence and aggression towards staff.
I'm just going to check that that's on.
Hi, I'm Nikki Pound. I'm the Women's Policy Lead at the TUC, which is the Trade Unions Congress, if you don't know what that stands for. So we are the Confederation of Unions in England and Wales. So we have 47 affiliated unions, which cover just about 5.2 million working people, and about 57% of trade union membership in the UK are women. So we do a lot of work on obviously advancing women's equality in the workplace.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz Green, and I'm a senior researcher at USDAW, one of the unions affiliated to the TUC. We're the union for shop, distributive and allied workers. And like Nikki said, the majority of people working in the retail sector are women, and that's reflected in our membership, which is around 55% women.
Thanks so much, Liz. If I could come to you first, actually. We know anecdotally that there's been an increase in violence and aggression, particularly against retail workers. What's that looking like for you? Are there particular behaviours that are sort of escalated in a particular period of time? Did you see that particularly beginning in COVID? Like, what's that sort of picture looking like for your members at the moment?
I mean, there was a huge spike in abuse during COVID, which was triggered by all of those things that I think we recognise if you went into a store. Retail workers became enforcers of social distancing rules, mask wearing. There were stock shortages, customer frustration, and I mean that was a huge spike. But discounting that, we do an annual survey of violence and abuse against retail workers, and since 2019, discounting that COVID spike, it's risen year on year. And our results for last year, I think around 3/4 of members experienced incidents of verbal abuse in the past 12 months. Over around half were threatened by a customer. And the number of workers who experience assault at work almost doubled to around 17%, which was a huge jump. And the main triggers for that are around a rise in shoplifting. That's increased year on year as well. I think most recent figures for October show it rose by 13% on the previous year. Customer frustrations with technology, with stock shortages, with the cost of goods, those frustrations get taken out on staff on a daily basis.
Thank you. I think that'll be familiar to many frontline workers. If I can come to you, Nikki, is that a picture you're seeing more broadly across the sectors, across your members?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we did a report in 2016 called just a bit of banter, which was specifically looking at sexual harassment in the workplace. And we revisited some polling around bullying, violence, harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace in 2023 as part of our kind of campaigning to get the Worker Protection Act on the statute books. And in 2016, we found that like half of all women had experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. When we revisited that research in 2023, which admittedly was a smaller poll with some more just specific questions, but we found that 3 in 5 women have experienced harassment, verbal abuse, sexual harassment or bullying at work. So that would suggest an increase across sectors. It was particularly acute for young women. So 2 in 3 young women had experienced sexual harassment, bullying or violence at work. And we do see intersections as well with that. So we know that for disabled women, Black women and LGBT workers, that rises to about 7 in 10. So I think we are definitely seeing things are not getting better. And I think when we look at our affiliate members research, like USD or Unison have done some research recently and found that sort of 1 in 10 healthcare workers experience sexual harassment. The RMT actually did a member survey as well, and 80% of their female workers said that they thought that harassment working in transport was getting worse. So yeah, I think we are seeing that it's definitely not getting better. I think that is something that we can definitely say. And I think across sectors, it does seem to be getting worse. Maybe some people are speaking up a little bit more about it because of things like Me Too, but also I think we are sort of, from what our affiliates are saying, people are sort of still having to deal with that idea that it is actually just part of the job and you have to accept it. Again, I think it's been quite interesting to see with the Employment Rights Bill going through, and there's measures in that to strengthen protections around harassment further. But a lot of the conversation has been like, oh, this is going to be a ban on banter. You won't be able to say anything, you won't be able to do anything in pubs, in shops and stuff. And it's like, no, this is not what this is about. So I think, yeah, there's definitely the attitude towards that, and what people expect people to put up with at work is not improving, it doesn't seem.
Thank you so much. Mercedes, healthcare, we know that this is a huge issue as well. What kind of behaviours are you seeing most prevalent, and what do you think some of the triggers around that are for frontline healthcare workers currently?
Yeah, so similarly, I think we can track it back to COVID as well. I think during COVID, I think the NHS was sort of championed. They were seen as heroes. They were seen as sort of lifesavers. But I think quickly after that, we saw quite a big deterioration in that. I think a lot of people now come to A&E, for example, self-diagnosing, already, thinking they know what their diagnosis is. And that sort of spills out into frustrations towards staff. Our A&E front door is very vulnerable, especially at night. I would say after 10 p.m, we have a lot of people coming in under the influence of substances, so alcohol, drugs. The increase in mental health across society has also impacted healthcare services as well. I think some of our trends are a lot around verbal abuse, rude behaviour, attitudes towards staff. However, we do see the occasional incident of sexual violence and abuse towards staff. We've seen incidents involving weapons as well. So especially at our front door, again, very vulnerable patients coming in with weapons, injuring staff as well. We've seen staff on long-term sickness due to incidents of violence and aggression. A lot of our staff have normalised it, unfortunately, and I know that's been a theme of today. And I think we need to do a lot more in terms of empowering and championing that it's not normal. People don't sign up for work to be abused, violence, aggression, all of that is kind of thing. So I think we do need to do a lot more in terms of a shift in that kind of outlook, that it's not normal. If you sign up to work at a workplace, we should be protected, and you should be able to start your job and go home at the end of the day knowing that you are safe and you're protected by your workplace as well. So very similar themes across the board, I would say.
Absolutely, thank you. And really stressful for staff to be dealing with that on a daily basis,
Absolutely.
as we know.
Yeah.
Jack, can I come to you to talk about some of the challenges of kind of working late at night, sometimes in isolated conditions, and the kind of toll that these kind of behaviours have on staff?
Yeah, very similar picture, unfortunately, similar to what my kind of fellow panelists have described. I can see there are a lot of parallels, particularly very much relate to some challenges at night through customers that may be intoxicated, or drug use, or even homelessness, people kind of searching for kind of dry, warm space in terms of the network and trains. And that really invites a lot of vulnerabilities in terms of the transport network. particularly around how our staff deal with that. So we've tried to invest a lot of time and money in training staff to equip them when they're presented with those circumstances. I think it's natural sometimes as human beings to react to that when you feel yourself presented in a vulnerable situation. So some training that we've developed has seemed to have had a real impact in terms of the ability for staff to be able to handle some of those situations. Obviously, kind of the ideal scenario is that we don't put our staff in those situations, and many of them are now coming to work. I think you used the phrase normalised, and sorry I wasn't here for the early part of today, but it sounds like that's very much been a theme. And staff are saying that they're coming to work feeling that this is part of their job. It's inevitable in some form that they're going to have to deal with that. So we're investing a lot of time also in making sure that staff have the channels to report. We are seeing volumes of reporting increasing as a result of that. It might sound slightly perverse, but we feel that's a good thing because people are talking about this, they're acknowledging it. It gives us the data and the insight to be able to understand how we're dealing with this. And then longer term, we will need to think about the measures, the investment, the policies that we will need to change to try to mitigate some of this behaviour and activity.
Thank you. I think, like you say, opening up those reporting mechanisms absolutely key, isn't it? So that we know where the hotspots are, where the risks are, and we try and prevent that escalation for other colleagues. You mentioned training there. Is there any other kind of support that that transport workers are particularly finding useful, or they've asked for, or anything else you can share around? What kind of implementation specifically is working well?
Yeah, I mean, the training has been targeted in terms of our gate line staff, so the staff that you would see when you're presenting your ticket to go through the barriers. That in particular has been really helpful because it's provided staff with the techniques and the ability to be able to diffuse a situation. I'm not sure how many of you in the room are rail users, but I can very much appreciate that sometimes emotions are heightened because customers are frustrated, which we would prefer to avoid at all costs. But unfortunately, some customers take that to the next level in terms of their interaction and aggression that they then express. And staff are becoming increasingly better equipped to be able to handle and deal with that. We've also done some work around a campaign called Bystander Intervention, which is very much around anyone who is witnessing a scenario which looks to be a little bit nasty or perhaps could turn nasty, to be able to step in. And I quite often quote my own example of being on a train late at night. I'm sat in a carriage which was reasonably empty with a young mum, with a couple of children, group of men sat having a drink, having perhaps a little bit too much fun. Language started turning a bit blue. She asked them to stop. They didn't. I stepped in and asked them just to consider how they were behaving. It's making a judgment in that moment that doesn't put yourself in harm's way, that can potentially diffuse and mitigate a situation, and helping fellow passengers, that a young mum with two young kids in this case, kind of feel safe.
Completely agree, and that's something we really advocate at the Trust in our stand-up street harassment bystander training. Completely, there's something that we can all do. It doesn't have to be a direct intervention. It could be just distracting or providing someone with an exit from the situation. So that's really useful. Thank you. Mercedes, if I can come back to you, what's the impact of this constant exposure to this kind of violence, aggression, abuse? I mean, it must be completely devastating for staff. And how does it impact their mental health, their well-being, and how do you see that kind of panning out as far as not just staff retention, but morale and their ability to carry out their jobs?
I think interestingly, throughout our staff surveys, staff have reported feeling, low in staff morale, team morale, struggling to do their day-to-day duties. But I think nurses are a bunch of very compassionate people. So I think for them, it's about affecting the care they give to patients. So actually, they worry less about themselves and they worry more about being able to deliver good care to patients. And that's also interesting in itself because they, take a step aside. They're not worried about their well-being or, their sort of mental health. It's about actually how can they still deliver good care. So I think that's the most sort of rewarding thing about working with nurses and doctors actually, is that they still want to deliver a good level of care and a good standard of care. But, staff
sickness has increased. So we know that staff are taking sick days due to incidents of violence and aggression, up to 6 weeks off of work, unfortunately, due to incidents. We know that staff confidence has dropped. So actually being able to deliver their day-to-day duties is now becoming a struggle. Staff even being attracted to the NHS, unfortunately. I speak to a lot of student nurses in university, and actually they're very shocked and surprised at what their potential career could look like in the future now. So I think we need to consider that as a big issue here, because actually NHS jobs and nursing jobs were very attractive at one point, but actually due to the risks that we're putting our staff at, it's no longer an attractive career. So yeah, I think that's what staff are struggling with.
That is devastating, isn't it? Yeah, I think you've pinpointed there that long-term impact and people just questioning if they even want to go in to those sectors, which is, really concerning to hear. Liz, if I could come back to you, are these sort of impacts similar across retail workers? I mean, I'm imagining that kind of abuse, that's on a daily basis. And how does that sort of impact on people and their ability to carry out their jobs?
I mean, it's really similar to both healthcare and transport. I think I can really see the same themes being reflected in what we hear from our members. I think bearing that brunt of customer frustration and how to keep yourself safe, because there's similar issues in retail. You've got small convenience stores, you've got stores in stations, we've got members in petrol stations, so in isolated areas. And if you are working late at night, if you're working early in the morning, you're often, even if there is a policy against lone working, sometimes even if there's two of you, you're covering each other. So inevitably there will be times you're in that store, you're in that site on your own, and you are vulnerable. And the advice that we give to our members is the same. You should never be putting yourself in the way in the way of harm, but inevitably it's a natural reaction if you see a shoplifter to go oi or hey, and that's a real trigger point when people are observed or people are caught. I don't know.
Thank you. No, that's just, I mean, I think that so many of these themes echo across so many sectors, don't they? And it's really devastating to hear that. If I can come back to you, Nikki, to look a bit more at the sort of research you've done around the impact on women specifically. Obviously, we know that sexual harassment hugely disproportionately affects women. How do you see that playing out across the sectors that your members are part of? And are there sort of specific types of support that women need that maybe we could better provide? Any of your thoughts around that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, from research that we've done and then member surveys that our affiliates have done, I mean, across all the research that the TUC's done, particularly in terms of sexual harassment, it's a lot of inappropriate comments of a sexual nature. It's a lot of really intrusive comments. It's a lot of banter, eye roll. And I think one of the things that comes through when we've done our research is that actually for people who have been victims of sexual harassment, people, including managers, including people who've experienced it, often perceive sexual harassment to only be physical touching, which does also happen, but actually there are other behaviours that constitute sexual harassment, something that as well is coming through a lot of our members, that a lot of our members are telling us is that online harassment through workplace, things that you use in the workplace, like Teams, like work-based WhatsApp groups, these sorts of things are increasingly common. And, like when you speak to like women who've been in the trade union movement and been in the world of work for, decades, like they will tell you about, they used to go to work and people would have like, page 3 things posted up on the walls in the offices. That doesn't happen anymore in most workplaces, but what does happen is like the circulation of inappropriate images on like workplace WhatsApp groups and things like that. So there's all sorts of things, and then there is also the kind of prevalence of actual physical violence. So I just want to touch on Unite's most recent survey, which they published in the summer. They surveyed 300,000 women across 19 sectors that they represent. A quarter had been sexually assaulted while at work. 8% had been a victim of sexual coercion. 56% had received sexually offensive jokes. 55% had experienced unwanted gesturing or sexual remarks, and 4 in 10 had been inappropriately touched. And then, about 30% had pornographic images shared with them by a manager, a colleague, or a third party. So, right across the board, we're seeing these behaviours, are still pretty endemic and entrenched. And there's these new dimensions of sort of like online as well. I think in terms of what more needs to happen, what needs to be done, I think to Jack's point, I think the first thing that leaders of organisations need to do is make clear that people can report this stuff and it will be taken seriously. Like, the thing that comes through all of our research is that reporting of this stuff is so low, and the way that we get this data is our affiliates do anonymous member surveys so people don't feel like they're putting themselves at risk. But when we do our research, I think on average across all of them, it's always something like 75, 85, 80% of people don't report, and they don't report because they don't think they'll be believed. And so fundamentally, I think there has to be a starting at the top of leadership saying, we are going to create an environment for our staff that says, we're not going to tolerate this. And zero tolerance doesn't mean that immediately you go to like whatever the most, it's not necessarily about saying that you won't do a fair investigation or anything, but it's about saying we will take every report seriously and we will investigate it in a fair way, and we will do it in a transparent way, and there will be safe reporting routes, and we will also signpost you to support from Vogue organisations or whatever it might be, and just kind of creating that culture that instead of creating a culture where we say, oh, it's not a problem here, or it's just part of the job, or it's just a joke or whatever, instead of creating that culture where you're basically saying this is kind of acceptable actually and we're not going to do anything about it, what you're saying is it's not acceptable and we will support you and we will take it seriously. And that isn't predetermining the outcomes of what action you might take in an individual situation, but it is saying to people that you do have our support and we're not just going to ignore it. And I think that can only happen if you have people who are leading organisations saying we are committed to doing this and we're going to put the time and the effort and the money into putting all of those things in place.
Thank you so much. I think you've hit the nail on the head there about that. It's like that feedback loop, isn't it? If people are brave enough to come forward and explain what's happened, then what happens and what's the support they get then? And actually you're mentioning the online abuse. We actually did some research around that. I think it was 3 years ago for Personal Safety Day. And it was also shocking that really escalated during COVID with people spending, far more of their time online, but also those channels that we use every day for socialising and work being misused to continue those behaviours that potentially might have started in the workplace. So completely recognise that. Just picking up on the theme of support, you mentioned referring into specialist organisations. Is there anything you can add from a healthcare perspective or transport around what employees need as far as post-incident support and the kinds of things, that might be useful, particularly if they've reported anonymously, they don't necessarily want to escalate something with the police? What kind of role can employers do to really encourage people to come forward and give them that advice in the first place?
I think it's about taking every report seriously. So allowing staff to have the space to speak up, but then also having a thorough investigation post-incident as well. Also signposting at the right time. I think it's crucial to identify when staff come forward that actually that's their time, that they've been brave enough to speak up. So actually we need to rally together and actually issue that support at the right time for them as well. At the NHS, we have a very good staff wellbeing service, all qualified psychologists, and they work really closely with our staff post-incident and in the months after an event as well, because we know that actually psychological trauma lasts a lot longer as well. So it's not just about the physical harm, it's also about the psychological harm. So staff psychologist support is very important to the staff. Also occupational health services as well that staff have access to, and any sort of free counselling services that we become aware of, we always make sure that staff are aware of them as well.
Thank you.
Very similar in rail, so we have a number of the similar practices, and of course it's really key that we have the right amount and appropriate pastoral care in place for people. But the compelling theme that continues to flow through as feedback is, if people are going to put themselves out there and speak up and report, then not only do they want to be taken seriously, they want to see follow through. And so it's really important in rail, in terms of our relationship with the British Transport piece, where people are identified or named, that there is strong follow through and the ability to follow through, to convictions or imprisonment, which we've seen in a number of cases. And that's really critical for some of the victims of this type of abuse and violence to be able to speak up.
Thank you so much. Just wary of time, I just wanted to put a kind of final question to you all, really, which is, do you think there's still a gap between policy and practice? How can we encourage our employees to recognise that those policies and practices are in place for their best interests? Lone worker devices aren't for tracking them, they're for making sure we know where they are. What's the message that we can link to the sort of devastating experiences that people are having, to really reassuring them that as employers we're there to sort of put their interests first?
I'll start as I've got the mic. So I think from my perspective, the reassurance, if that's the right word to take from this conversation, these type of events, is this is a societal issue. We've heard so many parallels, and let's be efficient in our efforts to try to address this. Let's coordinate and unite where it's possible to do so. And I know many of the in the room are and will continue to do so. But I think that's really important in terms of our support for our staff and employees, particularly our frontline staff, but also in our conversations with government, current government and potentially future governments, in terms of our influence and the power of our voice. I'm also a board member on the Institute Customer Service, and I'm working very closely with them to try to represent the voice of service staff in knowledge of what we've heard from retail sector in particular. But it is a societal issue, and I think we have power and strength in joining up to talk about this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I'll just end on, I think it's about protecting our staff and ensuring that staff feel safe coming to work. So using those policies and procedures to ensure that staff understand what's in them and they're actually user friendly, because I think we have a lot of policy procedures and paperwork that staff are not aware of, or they don't understand. English may not be their first language. So how are we actually using them to protect our staff, and also that they're aware of them and what that means for them on a very basic level? So I think we can use what we have already in a much better way to protect our staff.
Thank you.
I think there is a massive gap between what's said and what's actually done. So I think enforcement is a big part of that, and the bodies that we have, such as the HRC. I think there's a role for the HSE around workplace safety as well. I think they need to be better resourced to be able to actually carry out their enforcement action. We also need to see, not that people want to get to the stage where you're taking an employer to tribunal, but that system, like you just wouldn't at the moment, because of the way it kind of re-traumatizes you, but also you could be waiting years. So there are structural things around how we make sure that when you get to the stopgap is actually enforced. I guess the other thing I'm going to say is, and legislation is only as strong as it is if it happens in practice, but Saskia, you will know what I'm going to say. The thing that I think is so powerful about the Worker Protection Act, which is only specifically about sexual harassment, so that's a new duty on employers where they have to proactively think about how they prevent the sexual harassment of their employees. Obviously, if you're thinking about sexual harassment, I would argue anyone who's doing that properly has to think about all forms of bullying, harassment culture. That is potentially a really powerful piece of legislation. And I think the thing for me as a trade unionist that gives it its power is, as workers now, you can go into your workplace and ask your employer, what are you doing to comply with the Worker Protection Act? And if they say, no one's reported sexual harassment, no one said anything, we don't have a problem here, you can say, well, it doesn't matter, because it's not about whether someone came forward to make a report. It's about what are you doing to mitigate the risks based on our organisation, the risks that our workers may experience. And I think that really can potentially shift the conversation. So my job at the moment is pretty much going around anywhere that will have me to say to people, go to your workplace and ask, what are you doing to comply with this? Because it is the law now and you do have to do it. And I'm not saying you should be adversarial. I'm just getting a bit worked up, but like that's the conversation to start, I think, having. And I think that's part of the empowerment for workers is, you know, bring that conversation to the table and speak to your unions as well to get that backing and that support.
Thank you so much. And finally, Liz, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to pick up on what Jacqueline said about working in a coordinated approach. And I think what comes out from frontline workers, I think, is there's a basic lack of respect. There's a kind of dehumanising of people who are in service roles. You expect a service, you demand a service, but you don't see the person who's delivering that service. Where we run a Freedom from Fear campaign, we also run a Call It Out sexual harassment campaign, but I'm going to talk about the Freedom from Fear campaign. And as part of that, we get the support of retailers. You know, it wasn't always the case, but every retailer we work with is on board with that campaign. We're working with the National Business Crime Centre this year, so we've got local police forces attending those events. The Respect Week is next week. It coincides with Safer Business Action Week, which is something the police are running. We've got police and crime commissioners coming down. We've got MPs coming down. And it's a jointly making that case that for us, you know, the legislation in the crime and policing bill, that protection, standalone offence against assaulting a retail worker, that could be transformational for our members, provided we work jointly to make sure that legislation is being used, to make sure that our members feel able to report to their employers, to make sure that their employers are taking action, and to make sure that the police are responding in a timely manner.
Fantastic.
And that's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. You've all given such a fantastic contribution. Please join me in thanking our panellists